Mara Grayson nearly dropped the tray of champagne flutes when the man in the tailored navy suit walked in like he owned the entire hospital because, technically, he did. Well, not owned, as Karen from the volunteer committee whispered beside her, but he's the major donor. The fundraiser wouldn't even be happening if it weren't for him. Mara didn't care. She hadn't come here tonight to meet some rich guy. She was here to help raise money for the children's cancer wing, the same wing that had saved her little cousin 2 years ago. This was personal. Still, she couldn't help noticing how the man's presence shifted the energy in the ballroom. His stride was confident, his jaw sharp, his black hair just a little too perfectly messy. He had that look like he was used to arriving late and still being the most important person in the room. "Who is that?" Mara whispered. Karen leaned in. "That's Fletcher Carrigan." Mara blinked. "The name on the building, the one and only." Mara made a face and turned back toward the bar. "Great." Another millionaire with a god complex. She didn't notice that Fletcher was watching her from across the room. He saw her before she saw him. Noticed the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled at an elderly donor, how she rushed over when a waiter dropped a tray of hors d'oeuvres, how she didn't seem to care about the gowns or the cameras flashing around the other guests. She looked real, unpolished, unbothered, and completely uninterested in him. That was new. Fletcher had come tonight out of obligation. Carrigan Medical funded this hospital, and he showed up once a year to shake hands and cut checks. He expected the usual hollow compliments and women trying too hard. Not her. When she brushed past him near the silent auction table, he caught her scent jasmine and vanilla. Not expensive perfume, just her. "Excuse me," he said, stepping into her path. Mara stopped short, nearly colliding with him. "Oh, sorry, didn't see you." He smiled slightly. "That's surprising," she raised an eyebrow. "Why, most people make a point of noticing me," Fletcher said. Mara tilted her head. "Well, I guess I'm not most people," he laughed, really laughed, clearly. She looked down at his name tag and gave a polite smile. "Mr. Carrigan, thanks for whatever you do," he grinned. "You have no idea what I do you? Not even a little." He leaned in slightly. "Want to find out?" Mara narrowed her eyes. "Is that your idea of a line?" "No," he said honestly. "It's my idea of curiosity." She looked around. "Well, I'm actually on duty. Volunteering. I can see that." He gestured to her badge. "Mara right?" She nodded, surprised he'd read it. "Yeah." "Well, Mara, when you're off duty, I'd like to talk, just talk." She hesitated. He was too smooth, too handsome, too rich. But something about the way he looked at her like she was the only one in the room made her say, maybe. The rest of the night flew by. Mara stayed busy, helping with donations and smoothing out last-minute chaos. But every time she glanced across the ballroom, Fletcher was already looking at her. She caught him once, standing alone with a drink in hand, ignoring a group of board members trying to get his attention. All he did was give her a small nod, like they were in on some private joke. She shook her head and kept moving. This wasn't her world. But by the time the final speech ended and the lights dimmed, Mara was exhausted. She ducked out onto the balcony for some air, slipping off her heels and leaning against the railing. "You made it through," came a voice behind her. She turned to find Fletcher there again, hands in his pockets now, his tie loosened. "Barely," she said, smiling. "You were the only one here not pretending," he said, stepping beside her. She glanced at him. "That's not really a compliment." "It is to me." She looked away, unsure how to respond. "This whole scene, it's not me. I could tell." "Why are you out here?" she asked. "Same reason as you, tired of being looked at for what I can give." She turned to him then. "Isn't that kind of your thing?" He gave a half chuckle. "You'd think. But sometimes I wonder what it'd be like if no one knew my last name." She softened, just barely. "Maybe someone would like you anyway. Would you?" She froze. "I don't even know you." "Then let me fix that." He extended a hand. "Fletcher, just Fletcher." She looked at his hand, then back at his face. "Mara, I know," he said, grinning. She shook her head. "You're impossible, but charming." She rolled her eyes. "Debatable." He laughed again. "I like you." Mara blinked. "You don't even know me." "I know enough to want to." She studied him, trying to figure out what his angle was, but he didn't lean in, didn't pressure her, just stood there, waiting. "I'm not the kind of girl who gets swept up by guys in suits," she said quietly. "Good," Fletcher replied. "I'm not looking for that kind of girl." A long silence stretched between them, Then finally, Mara gave a tiny smile. All right, one conversation. Fletcher's eyes lit up. Tomorrow, I volunteer again in the afternoon. I'll be here, she shook her head. You don't have to, I want to. They stood there a little longer, under the fairy lights and soft music drifting from inside, and for the first time all night, Mara felt like maybe she wasn't completely out of place. Maybe he wasn't either. The next day, the hospital lobby buzzed with the usual chaos, clipboards shuffling, nurses darting past with purpose, and the faint smell of antiseptic clinging to the air. Mara stood behind the check-in desk, flipping through a stack of intake forms, her hair pulled into a messy bun that hadn't started the morning that way. She didn't expect him to show. Men like Fletcher Carrigan didn't do repeat appearances. They made charming promises and disappeared back into their world of private jets and boardrooms. She had told herself not to think about him on the subway ride-in. Told herself he was probably halfway to Switzerland or wherever people like him went to let their money stretch. But at 2:15, right when she was helping a mother fill out paperwork for a new pediatric appointment, she heard the deep, unmistakable sound of expensive dress shoes against marble. She didn't need to look up. I was hoping I'd catch you before your shift ended, Fletcher said. Mara kept her eyes on the form. It doesn't end for another hour. Perfect, he replied. That gives us time. She handed the clipboard back to the mother, gave a practiced smile, and called over another volunteer to take her place. Then she turned to Fletcher with folded arms. You know this isn't a cafe, right? She said. He didn't flinch. I brought coffee. She glanced down at the 2 paper cups in his hands. You bribing me with caffeine now, I'm bribing myself with a reason to talk to you again. Mara sighed but took one of the cups. Just until I have to get back. He followed her out to the small courtyard behind the hospital, where the staff sometimes escaped to catch a breath between shifts. It was quiet, shaded by a pair of overgrown trees with a few benches and a stone fountain that hadn't worked in years. She sat. He did too. I looked you up, Fletcher said after a long sip. Mara's head snapped toward him. You what? I had to know if you were real, he said, and if you were single. I'm not sure which part concerns me more. You volunteer 4 afternoons a week, he said, ignoring the jab. You're working on a degree in health administration, and you once organized a blood drive that broke a record for the hospital. How deep did you dig? Just enough to know you're not like anyone I usually meet. Mara stared at the chipped toe of her boot. That's not necessarily a compliment. It is from me. I don't understand you, she said, finally meeting his gaze. Why are you here, really? Fletcher leaned back on the bench. I told myself I was coming to check in on the hospital, that I had meetings to schedule, numbers to review. But I knew exactly when your shift started, and I made sure I'd be standing in that lobby at the right time. Mara took a slow breath. This isn't a good idea. Why not? Because I don't fit into your world. Who said I want you to? She looked at him, startled. I don't want you to fit into anything, Fletcher continued. I want to know who you are without the walls, without the badge, without the reasons you've convinced yourself this can't work. Mara didn't respond for a long moment. Then quietly she said, You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me, she stood. I've got to get back. He rose too. Then let me walk you in. They stepped back into the building in silence. Just before she turned down the staff corridor, he caught her hand. I'm not asking you to be anything except honest with me, he said. Can you do that? She nodded slowly. Only if you do the same. His grip tightened slightly. Deal. She didn't know what made her trust that. Maybe it was the way his voice dropped when he spoke to her, or how he didn't glance at his phone even once during their time outside. Maybe it was something she couldn't name yet, but she believed him. That evening, after her shift ended, Mara walked out to find a sleek black car idling near the curb. Fletcher was behind the wheel, window rolled down. Want a ride? He asked. I take the train. I know. I just thought maybe tonight you wouldn't have to. She hesitated only a moment before walking toward the passenger side. The interior smelled of leather and something faintly citrus. The seats were stitched with the kind of craftsmanship she'd only seen in magazines. I hope this isn't a bribe, she said as she buckled in. It's a ride, he said simply, pulling out into the street. They drove in silence for a few blocks before she asked, Do you always drive yourself? No driver today. I wanted the quiet. You don't strike me as someone who likes quiet. I don't, but lately it's all I want, she turned to him. Why? He took a breath. Because the noise stopped meaning anything. The deals, the restaurants, the people who pretend to care. None of it sticks. Mara studied him for a moment. That's a lonely way to live. It is. They stopped at a red light. She looked out the window, then back at him. I live in a walk-up, she said. No elevator. I have to kick the door twice before it opens properly. And my neighbor plays the trumpet at 2 in the morning, Fletcher smiled. Sounds like character. Sounds like chaos. I wouldn't mind that. You'd lose your mind in 2 days. Maybe, he said. But I'd still want to try. She gave him directions to her building, and when they pulled up, he didn't move to get out or say goodbye. He just looked at her for a long moment. Can I see you again? You already are, he laughed softly. You know what I mean. She opened the door. I'll be volunteering again on Thursday. I'll be there. As she climbed the steps to her building, she didn't look back, but she felt his presence behind her like a shadow that didn't quite leave when it should have. And Fletcher, still watching from the car, knew something had shifted. Not because she'd agreed to see him again, but because she hadn't said no. Mara stood frozen outside the art therapy room, her hand still on the door handle. She could hear the laughter of children inside, the rustling of crayons, and the occasional clang of a rogue paintbrush hitting the tile floor. But it wasn't the normal chaos that gave her pause, it was the voice. Deep, steady, and unmistakably him. What's Fletcher Carrigan doing in this wing? She asked under her breath. She stepped inside, heart thudding with reluctant curiosity. He was crouched beside a boy in a hospital gown, helping him color in the jagged outline of a superhero cape. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and there was a streak of blue marker across one of his knuckles. When he looked up and saw her, the boy grinned. She's the one I told you about, Fletcher said, handing the crayon back to the child. You're the bossy lady from the check-in desk, the boy asked. Guilty, Mara said, blinking through the surprise. Fletcher stood, brushing non-existent dust from his trousers. I thought I'd stop by and see how the art program was holding up. And you happened to find your way into a coloring session, I called ahead, he said. I wanted to understand what you actually do here, not just read about it on a report. Mara folded her arms. You came all the way here to watch kids draw. I came here to learn, he said. And not just about crayons. She gestured toward the hallway. I need to check inventory before the next supply shipment arrives, he nodded. Then I'll walk with you. They made their way through the corridor, passing bulletin boards layered with construction paper crafts and donor plaques. She didn't speak until they were inside the storage room, where she began scanning the shelves for missing items. You're not going to find what you're looking for in here, she said without turning around. I'm not looking for anything, Fletcher replied. I just wanted to see your world again. You're circling close to flattery, don't. I'm not trying to flatter you. I'm trying to understand why you hide behind sarcasm every time I get close. Mara dropped a clipboard onto the counter. Because you don't belong here. You're the kind of man who shows up, makes a pretty speech, writes a check, and disappears. And I've seen what happens to people who expect more than that. He leaned against the doorframe. You think I'm pretending? I think you're used to getting what you want. I don't want anything from you, he said quietly. Except the truth. She turned then, slowly. The truth is, I've worked too hard to keep my life simple. I don't need someone crashing through it like a hurricane. Maybe the hurricane is already here, Fletcher said. And maybe it's not trying to destroy anything. Maybe it's trying to build something new. She stared at him, unreadable. Then the radio clipped to her belt, crackled with a request for assistance in the main lobby. I have to go, he stepped aside. I'll wait. She paused in the doorway. You don't have to, I know. Later that evening, long after her shift ended, Mara found herself walking through the sculpture garden behind the hospital. It was quiet, lit only by warm ground lights and the occasional flicker of city traffic beyond the hedges. She didn't expect anyone else to be there, but Fletcher was seated on one of the stone benches, elbows on his knees, staring at the night sky. I should be surprised, she said. He looked up. I didn't want to leave without saying something. She sat, just out of arm's reach. This better not be a rehearsed speech. It isn't, she waited. I came into that fundraiser expecting another night of polite lies and overpriced wine, he said. I didn't expect you. I'm not a revelation, she said. You are to me. She looked away. Fletcher, this thing between us, it's not sustainable. You live in a world I can't touch, and I don't want to be another interesting distraction for someone who'll move on the second the novelty fades. I've had plenty of distractions, he said. And not one of them ever made me question who I am the way you do, she laughed softly. That doesn't sound like a compliment. It's not. It's a warning. She turned to him then. To who? To both of us. They sat in the silence that followed, the kind that only settles between two people who know something is changing but can't yet name it. Finally, she asked, "What do you expect from me?" "Nothing," he said. "But I want the chance to know you outside of hospital walls and fluorescent lights. No filters, no expectations, just you." "And if I say no, I'll accept it," Fletcher said, "but I won't stop hoping for a yes." Mara stood, brushing her hands against her jeans. "Hope's a dangerous thing. So is pretending you don't feel anything," he said. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked away, her footsteps echoing softly against the stone path. When she reached the gate, she stopped and looked back. "I'm off this Saturday." His eyes lifted to meet hers. "I know a place. It better not have a valet. It won't." And then she was gone, lost in the city shadows, but Fletcher stayed there a while longer, staring at the bench where she'd sat. For the first time in years, he felt something dragging at his chest, not desire, not conquest, hope. The kind that wasn't tied to profit margins or polished contracts, the kind that could wreck him if he let it. And somehow, he already knew he would. The rain fell in steady sheets against the tall windows of the rooftop greenhouse, softening the glittering skyline beyond into a blur of silver and gold. Warm light from hanging lanterns flickered over rows of orchids and ivy, and a table for two sat beneath a canopy of hanging wisteria, glowing from the soft amber flames of wax-dripped candles. Mara stepped onto the stone floor, her breath catching just slightly at the sight. "You said this wouldn't have a valet," she said under her breath, voice edged with wary amusement. Fletcher stood beside the table wearing a dark sweater and slacks this time, no blazer, no tie. "It didn't. You walked in through the garden entrance." She raised an eyebrow. "And this is just casual? It's private," he said. "I wanted to give you something that didn't belong to anyone else." She moved toward the table slowly, trailing her fingers over the petals of a blooming white orchid. "How did you even find this place?" "I own the building," Fletcher said. "But I didn't know this was up here until a week ago. One of the architects mentioned it during a meeting." She sat down, watching him. "You didn't bring anyone else here?" "No." He poured a glass of wine and handed it to her. "This is the first time I've been here with the lights on." She took the glass and studied him across the table. "Why go through all this trouble? You don't even know what I want from you." "I don't want to guess," he said. "I want you to tell me." Mara lifted the glass but didn't drink. "I want honesty. No filters. No polished versions of you that were made for boardrooms or black tie galas." Fletcher leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Then I'll start with this. I've spent most of my life building walls. I didn't know how many until you walked through one." She looked away quickly, overwhelmed by the intensity in his voice. "I'm not asking you to forgive how complicated I am," he continued. "Just don't walk away before I've had the chance to be someone real with you." Her voice barely rose above the sound of rain. "Then don't disappear when things stop being easy." "I won't." She let the silence stretch again, long and full of something too fragile to name yet. Then the door opened behind them, and a young woman with her hair in a bun brought out 2 plates, set them down, and left without a word. Mara glanced at the food, then at him. "You cooked." "I asked my chef to stay late." "I told him it was important." She picked up her fork, took a bite, and blinked. "Okay, well, it was." They ate with the kind of quiet that doesn't require filling, and when the last fork was down, Fletcher stood and extended a hand toward her. "Come here," he said. Mara hesitated, then let him pull her to her feet. He led her just a few steps away, where a patch of stone floor had been cleared beneath the overhead vines. He reached into his pocket, pressed something on his phone, and soft music began to hum from hidden speakers. Her eyes narrowed. "You're not serious?" "I am. I don't dance." "You don't have to," he said, drawing her closer. "Just move." She let him pull her into his arms, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders. The music was slow, jazzy, not the kind of thing that demanded grace, just presence. After a minute, Mara looked up at him. "What happens when this ends?" Fletcher didn't hesitate. "It doesn't," she shook her head. "You can't promise that." "I'm not promising everything will be simple," he said, "but I'm not going anywhere, Mara. I'm not walking out the second it gets messy. You say that now, then let me prove it. I've seen what happens to people who believe words before action." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Then watch what I do." The music shifted, and he tightened his grip slightly, grounding her. "I've been careful my whole life," she whispered. "Because no one ever stayed long enough to clean up what they broke. I won't be another person who leaves you with a mess. And what if I'm the one who breaks something? Then we'll fix it." She exhaled, letting her head rest against his chest. "I'm terrified. So am I." They stayed there, swaying beneath the soft glow of the lanterns, the rain tapping gently above them like a quiet promise. By the time they left the rooftop, the rain had stopped and the sky had cracked open into stars. 2 weeks passed. They didn't spend every moment together, but something had shifted. Fletcher showed up on days Mara hadn't expected him, sometimes at the end of her shift with coffee in hand, sometimes to sit quietly while she filled out paperwork. He didn't try to impress her, he just showed up. And Mara found herself texting her roommate to say she wouldn't be home for dinner. She stayed late at the hospital, not because she had to, but because she knew he'd be waiting. One Thursday evening, Fletcher asked her to meet him at a gallery opening. She hesitated, but agreed. When she arrived, it wasn't the kind of event she'd feared. No flashing cameras, no velvet ropes. Just a quiet warehouse filled with paintings from pediatric patients, part of a fundraiser he'd quietly organized under someone else's name. "You didn't put your name on it," she said, surprised. "It's not mine," he replied. "It's theirs." That night, as they stood in front of a canvas covered in bold red brushstrokes by a girl battling leukemia, Mara reached for his hand. He turned to her, eyes searching. "What is it?" "You could have used this for PR," she said. "But you didn't." "I told you," he said, voice low. "I'm not pretending with you." She leaned in then, brushed her lips against his. It wasn't hungry or desperate, it was certain. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "I'm in." The next morning, Fletcher arrived at the hospital with a small envelope. He waited for her shift to end, then handed it to her. "What's this? Open it." Inside was a handwritten letter, no logo, no business header, just ink on thick paper. It began with, "I never believed in love without condition, until you." She looked at him, eyes wide. "Is this?" "A proposal," he said. "Not for marriage, not yet, just for a life together, starting now." Mara stared at him, heart pounding. "You said you wanted something real," he said. "So this is me. No contracts, no expectations, just hope." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers with his. "I want all of it," she said. "Even the messy parts." He smiled, the kind that softened everything sharp about him. "Then let's make a mess." Months later, the pediatric wing was renamed, not after Fletcher Carrigan, but after the children who filled it with color. Mara stood beside him at the dedication ceremony, her fingers laced through his, no longer afraid of what came next. Because when love showed up with its sleeves rolled and its heart open, she had finally stopped running, and Fletcher had finally stopped pretending. Mara adjusted the collar of her coat as the wind swept across the terrace of the Carrigan Foundation headquarters, high above the city. The view stretched endlessly, dotted with twinkling lights and the soft blue haze of dusk settling behind the skyline. She leaned against the glass railing, watching the final rays of sunlight slip beneath the horizon. Behind her, the doors to the boardroom opened and Fletcher stepped out, tucking his phone into his pocket. He didn't say anything at first, just came to stand beside her, close enough that she felt the warmth of him even through the chill. "You didn't have to wait," she said, eyes still on the skyline. "I didn't want to leave without you," he replied. She glanced sideways. "You look tense in there. They want to expand the overseas division, aggressively. And you disagree?" I told them no. "Not until we finish what we started here." She turned to him fully. "You're changing things. So are you." A gust of wind tugged at her hair, and he gently brushed a lock from her cheek, his hand lingering there for a moment longer than necessary. "They asked me to speak at tomorrow's ceremony," she said. "About the new pediatric program. You should, it was your vision." I thought it would be yours, she said quietly. Your name's still the one on the checks. Fletcher's expression softened. It's your work that gave those numbers meaning. She didn't respond right away. Then, do you ever miss it? What, the version of your life before this? He was quiet for a moment. When he answered, his voice was certain. There's not a single part I'd trade back. She looked at him then, really looked. The man who once lived behind curated perfection now stood with the weight of real purpose in his eyes. There was no mask. I used to think love was a disruption, Mara said. Something that knocked you off course. And now I think maybe it's the course. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a small black box. Her breath caught, not from the gesture, but from the way his hands trembled ever so slightly. I was going to wait until after the ceremony, he said, but I don't want to wait for perfect moments anymore. I want the real ones. She stared at the box, unmoving. I don't need a party, he continued, or approval. I just need you, every day, the way you are, the way you challenge me. The way you don't let me disappear behind charm or money, she blinked, tears gathering too fast for her to stop them. I want a life with you, he said. Whatever that looks like, I want to wake up next to you, fight with you, laugh with you, build something that matters. And I want to do it all knowing it's you beside me. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a solitaire set on a delicate platinum band, nothing flashy, just timeless. I love you, Mara Grayson. Will you marry me? She didn't hesitate, didn't reach for logic or fear. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. Yes, she whispered. Yes, 1,000 times. He kissed her, and it wasn't like their first or second or even 10th. It was something deeper, something earned. A promise sealed in breath and warmth and everything they had fought to become. Later that night, they lay tangled together on the couch in Fletcher's penthouse, far from any boardroom or gala. The fire crackled nearby, and Mara's head rested against his chest. You're not going to regret this, she asked, tracing a line along his collarbone. I've made a lot of decisions based on fear or control, he said, but not this one. This one came from knowing what it feels like to love someone who makes me better. She shifted to look at him. You do that for me too, he kissed her forehead. Then we're even. They spent the weekend finalizing the logistics for the new initiative. Mara would take over as director of community programs at the foundation, a position she had earned not through proximity to Fletcher, but through her own relentless devotion. They agreed to keep their engagement quiet until after the public unveiling of the Children's Wellness Center, not out of secrecy, but because they didn't want to blur the meaning of the work with the details of their personal lives. The next morning, Fletcher stood quietly behind the curtain as Mara took the stage at the press event. She wore a navy dress, simple and strong, and spoke with the kind of clarity that drew people in without effort. He watched every second. When the applause ended and she stepped down, she found him waiting just off stage. You didn't even fidget, he said. I almost did, she replied. But then I thought of you. He took her hand. Come with me. She followed him through the side hallway to a small room filled with flowers and sunlight. A justice of the peace stood waiting, and beside him, a woman who looked like she'd been crying, Fletcher's longtime assistant, who had become something of a friend to Mara over the months. What is this? Mara asked. I didn't want to wait anymore, Fletcher said. I know we could plan something bigger later, but I want to start our life today. She turned toward the window, breath catching. This is insane. I know, he said, but it's us. She stared at him for a long moment. And then she smiled. Yes, she said again, right now. They married with no cameras, no flash, just a promise, just love. That night, he carried her across the threshold of their newly renovated brownstone, a quiet space nestled between the bustle of the city, filled with books and soft light and pieces of both their lives woven together. As they curled together beneath the covers, Fletcher whispered, You were never a disruption. You were the direction. And Mara, resting her head against his chest, whispered, You were the answer I didn't know I needed. Years later, the Carrigan-Grayson Children's Center became the cornerstone of the city's health initiative. The couple remained fiercely involved, balancing foundation work with quiet nights at home, weekend hikes just outside the city, and the occasional escape to a cabin Fletcher had built for them in the mountains. They never stopped choosing each other, not when the board pushed for expansion. Not when Mara's proposal for accessible mental health care met resistance. Not when Fletcher stepped back from several of his international holdings to prioritize what mattered most. They celebrated 10 years with a vow renewal under the same wisteria canopy where it had all begun, this time with candles, a soft breeze, and their daughter holding the rings in a trembling hand. And when Mara looked across the garden at Fletcher, eyes full of all the years, all the choices, all the love they both knew, there was never a life before this. There was only this one, built brick by brick, moment by moment together. Forever.